The air outside was thick with the scent of fresh rain. The street was quiet, still. No sound except the soft rustling of the trees in the morning breeze. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, but Mark's world was anything but beautiful. His hands gripped the doorframe as he stood in the doorway, watching her. Watching Sarah. The woman he had loved for more than a decade. The woman who had just driven away without even a single glance back. The car, a sleek black sedan, pulled slowly down the driveway, turning at the end, and then it was gone. Gone from his life. For the first time in years, Mark didn't know what to feel. He had always considered himself a man of action. He'd prided himself on being able to solve problems, to find solutions. But in this moment, in this reality, there was no solution. There was no answer. Only the silence that swallowed everything. Sarah, his voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the breeze, as if even the wind itself had turned its back on him. She hadn't said much. She didn't need to. The past few months had been building up to this. He had known something was off, but he had convinced himself it was just a rough patch. Everyone went through them, right? But now, the truth was painfully clear. His wife had left him for another man. A younger man. Mark's heart beat in his chest like a hammer, its rhythm erratic and harsh. He hadn't expected this. Not like this. Not so, suddenly. There were no arguments, no screaming matches, no desperate plea for her to stay. Sarah had simply made up her mind. It had been decided long before he had even had a chance to process the shift. A subtle shift. One that no one talks about, one that sneaks up in the middle of the night, unnoticed by the one who's being left behind. It wasn't like the movies, where someone throws a tantrum or demands answers. No. This was worse. This was quiet, cold, and final. He hadn't been given a chance to fight. He hadn't been given a chance to ask the one question that had been burning at him since she first started acting distant: why? But now, it was too late. Sarah was gone. Mark took a shaky breath and closed his eyes for a moment. The morning had started so differently. He had woken up early, like he always did on Sundays, feeling optimistic about the day ahead. He had made coffee for both of them, prepared her favorite breakfast, pancakes with maple syrup, just the way she liked them, and had set the table in the kitchen, ready for a peaceful morning. He had been ready for nothing more than to enjoy the day together. But Sarah hadn't come downstairs. At first, he had assumed she was just tired. They had been going through some challenges, but nothing that couldn't be worked through. He knew they could fix things if they talked, if they communicated. But as the hours stretched on, and she didn't appear, something inside him had shifted. He'd gone up to their bedroom, expecting to find her still asleep, wrapped up in their bed. But when he opened the door, the room was empty. Her side of the bed was neatly made, as if she had never been there. A small note was left on her pillow. Mark's heart had skipped a beat when he saw it. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong it was. He unfolded the note, his fingers trembling. It was short, simple, and devastating. "I've made a decision. I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving, Mark. Please don't try to find me." That was it. Nothing else. No explanation. No apology. Just a final, definitive declaration. A goodbye. The shock had hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of him. He felt a numbness creeping up from his chest, filling his entire body. He'd never thought it would come to this. He'd never thought his marriage would end like this. At first, Mark had been frozen. He couldn't even process what had happened. His mind was racing, searching for an explanation, for any kind of clue. Had he missed something? Had he done something wrong? Why hadn't she said anything? Why hadn't she fought for their marriage? But there was no time for those thoughts. The truth had already come crashing down. The door had opened in front of him, and Sarah had stepped out, suitcase in hand, her face unreadable. She hadn't even looked back when she walked out to the car. She hadn't said a word. She didn't have to. "I'm sorry, Mark," she had said quietly, before getting in the car with that younger man. That man who had stolen her heart. Mark hadn't even known his name, but he knew enough. He had seen the late-night text messages, the way she had been more distant, the way she had stopped caring. But even in his most painful moments, Mark hadn't thought it would end like this. Not like a ghost vanishing in the night. Not like someone turning off a light and walking away. No fight. No closure. Nothing. Mark felt as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. The life he had spent years building, the life he had thought was solid and secure, was now nothing more than a crumbling ruin. But there was something else, something deep inside him that gnawed at him as he stood in that doorway. It wasn't just the shock. It wasn't just the hurt. No, there was something more. It was a feeling, a quiet whisper, telling him that this wasn't over. That something had gone horribly wrong. That fate had something more in store for Sarah, and for him. He wasn't sure why he thought that. It wasn't logical. It wasn't rational. But in that moment, something deep inside his chest twisted, and the only thing he could feel was the certainty that this was far from the end of the story. Suddenly, Mark heard the distant sound of a car approaching. He glanced up, startled, his heart racing. But it wasn't Sarah. It was just a neighbor driving by. He closed his eyes again, trying to push away the intrusive thoughts. But they wouldn't leave. They kept circling in his mind like vultures. What had she done? What was she thinking? And, most importantly, what did the future hold for her? Sarah had left. But there was something more, something he didn't know yet. Something no one could have predicted. And as much as it tore at him to admit it, Mark knew deep down that her leaving wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far more complicated, something far darker. The question was, what had Sarah gotten herself into? And would she survive what was coming next? Mark shook his head, trying to push away the storm of thoughts. But the gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. It lingered, heavy and dark, like a shadow following him everywhere he went. The rain started falling, gently at first, and then harder, as if nature itself was mourning with him. But it wasn't just the rain. Something in the air was different. Something was wrong. Something that Sarah wouldn't be able to escape. And as Mark stood there, his heart heavy with both the loss and the strange feeling of foreboding, he couldn't shake the thought that the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The morning after Sarah left, Mark found himself standing in the middle of their empty living room, staring at the empty space where they had once shared so much. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, and every time he took a deep breath, it reminded him of everything that had been. The life they'd built together, years of memories, laughter, and shared dreams, now felt like an illusion. A fragile facade that had cracked without warning, leaving him standing alone in the rubble. He had tried to keep himself busy, to focus on something, anything, but his mind was constantly drifting back to the same unshakable question, why? Sarah had been everything to him. They had met when they were both young, only 25, fresh out of college. He remembered how her laugh had filled the room, how her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her ambitions. She had been the one who had encouraged him to follow his dreams, even when he doubted himself. They had built a life together, supported each other through thick and thin. They had fought through challenges, big and small. And yet, she had left him, just like that. He had replayed that moment over and over in his head. Her standing there in the doorway, suitcase in hand, her eyes devoid of any emotion as she walked away. It was as if she had already said goodbye long before she left. The only thing left in her eyes was cold finality. She hadn't even bothered to give him a reason, a clue as to what had gone wrong. And that silence had been louder than any words she could have spoken. Mark picked up his phone from the coffee table, his fingers hovering over the screen. He wanted to call her, to ask her, to beg for some kind of explanation. But deep down, he knew it was pointless. Sarah had made her choice, and now it was his turn to figure out how to move forward. Still, the need for answers gnawed at him. What had caused this? Was it really just about the younger man? Had he failed her in some way he hadn't seen? Was there something darker, more sinister, lurking behind her decision to leave? Suddenly, the phone buzzed in his hand. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he saw the name on the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "I know you're hurting. And I know you have questions. But there's more to Sarah's story than you realize. Call me when you're ready to hear the truth." Mark's stomach tightened. His finger hovered over the screen as his mind raced. Who could this be? It was the kind of message that sent a chill down his spine. A part of him wanted to dismiss it. After all, who would know anything about Sarah's sudden departure, except for Sarah herself? But another part of him, the part that had been aching for answers since she left, couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. He took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then someone answered. "Mark?" The voice was low, familiar, but Mark couldn't quite place it. "Yes," he replied, his voice shaky. "You don't know me," the voice continued, "but I know you. I've been following your story for a while now. I know you're looking for answers, and I can give them to you. But you need to listen carefully. This isn't just about Sarah leaving you for another man. This is about something much bigger. Something you're not seeing yet." Mark's pulse quickened. "Who is this? What do you mean, something bigger?" The voice on the other end paused for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Finally, they spoke again. "Meet me at the old diner on Oak Street. It's quiet there, and we'll have some privacy. I can explain everything. But be careful, Mark. The truth you're looking for might be more dangerous than you realize." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mark standing in the middle of the living room, stunned and unsettled. His mind raced with a million questions, but the most urgent one was, who could this be? Despite the uncertainty, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was the break he had been waiting for. Someone knew something. Someone was going to give him the answers he desperately needed. He glanced out the window, the sky overcast with dark clouds. It seemed fitting, somehow. The weight of the unknown hung heavily in the air, just like the storm that threatened to break at any moment. Mark grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, his thoughts swirling. The old diner on Oak Street was a place he hadn't been to in years. It was one of those forgotten relics of the past, rustic, worn down, and no longer the popular hangout it once was. He had no idea why someone would want to meet him there, but it was the only lead he had. As he walked toward the car, his mind flashed back to his conversation with Sarah the night before she left. She had been distant, closed off. She hadn't even looked him in the eye when he had tried to ask her what was going on. It had felt like she was hiding something, something big. But now, it felt like the world was unraveling around him, and the pieces didn't fit together. The drive to Oak Street felt longer than it should have. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the hum of the engine and the occasional passing car. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the message. Who would have known he was looking for answers? Who would have known anything about Sarah's departure? He arrived at the diner just as the sky opened up and rain began to pour. The neon sign flickered in the window, casting an eerie glow on the empty parking lot. Mark parked his car and stepped out into the rain, his coat pulled tightly around him. The diner was as dilapidated as he remembered, with chipped paint and broken windows. It seemed like no one had bothered to come here in years. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and the smell of greasy food and old coffee hit him instantly. The diner was dark, save for a single dim light above the counter. There was no one around. It felt like a ghost town. Mark's eyes scanned the room, and then he saw him, a man sitting at the far corner booth, his face obscured by shadows. Mark's heart skipped a beat. This had to be the person who had called him. He approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the empty diner. "Are you the one who called me?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man looked up, his face partially illuminated by the flickering light. His features were hard to make out, but there was something about his expression that unsettled Mark. It was a mix of pity and urgency, like someone who knew a dark secret but was struggling with whether or not to reveal it. "I'm the one," the man replied, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm the one who's been watching. I've been following Sarah for a long time, Mark. And I know what she's gotten herself into. But it's not just about her, you need to understand that. There are people involved. Dangerous people." Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, dangerous people? What's going on?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting around the diner as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. Finally, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Sarah didn't just leave you for a younger man. She's been involved in something far bigger. Something she got caught up in, something she couldn't escape. She didn't want you to know. She thought she could protect you by pushing you away. But now, she's in deeper than she ever realized. And so are you." Mark's mind was reeling. He leaned in closer, desperate for answers. "What does that mean? What do you know about Sarah?" The man looked over his shoulder, his eyes darting nervously. "I don't have much time. I'll tell you everything. But you need to be careful. There's more at play here than you can imagine. People's lives are at risk. Including yours." The tension in the air was palpable, and Mark could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. Mark couldn't breathe. The weight of the man's words pressed down on him, suffocating him. Sarah, his wife, his love, had been caught in something dangerous, something he couldn't even begin to understand. But this man, the one who had called him to the old diner, seemed to know more than he was letting on. And despite the danger hanging in the air, Mark couldn't stop himself from needing to know more. The man across from him shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His eyes flickered to the door again, checking for any sign of movement. There was a strange tension in the air, like they were being watched. Mark felt a chill crawl down his spine. The diner, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like the set of a thriller. Dark, oppressive, filled with unseen threats. "I don't have much time," the man repeated, his voice tense. "But if you want to know the truth, Mark, you need to listen closely." Mark's pulse quickened. "Who are you? And what does Sarah have to do with this?" The man exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as if the truth he was about to reveal was a burden. He glanced around once more before leaning forward, lowering his voice even further. "Listen, I don't know how much Sarah told you, but she's been involved with a group, a dangerous group. They've been keeping tabs on her for months. Maybe even years. It started small, innocent enough. But then, things took a darker turn." The man paused, looking Mark dead in the eyes. "They've been manipulating her. Using her. And I'm afraid it's not over. If anything, it's just getting started." Mark's head was spinning. His world had already been turned upside down, and now, the idea that Sarah had been involved in something dark and hidden for so long felt like a cruel joke. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, was hiding a side of herself he had never seen. Or worse, maybe she hadn't been hiding it at all. Maybe he just hadn't been paying attention. "This doesn't make sense," Mark said, his voice shaky. How do you know all this? Who are these people? The man leaned back in his seat, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them together. Let's just say I've been watching them. I've been keeping track of their movements for a while. Sarah got involved with them through a work project. It was supposed to be something small, a research initiative. But somewhere along the way, she got caught up in something much bigger. A power struggle. And it escalated. Mark's heart raced. A power struggle? Who are they? What do they want with her? The man leaned in again, his voice barely audible. They want control. Information. And Sarah, she's been helping them, unknowingly at first. She's a part of something they're using to their advantage. They've manipulated her into making decisions she doesn't fully understand. Mark felt a sense of vertigo sweep over him. His wife, Sarah, had been unknowingly playing a part in something so far beyond him. He had no idea how to process this, how to even begin to make sense of it all. The man's eyes narrowed, and he looked around the diner one last time, his gaze sharp. You need to understand one thing, Mark. There are people in this world who operate in the shadows. They don't care about morality, about ethics. They only care about their own power. And Sarah? She's a pawn in their game. Mark's breath caught in his throat. A pawn? His wife? She had been part of something sinister, and he hadn't even known it. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean, she's a pawn? What does this group want from her? The man exhaled slowly, his face tense. I can't tell you everything. I don't know all the details. But I know this, they're using her for leverage, for information. And now, they've made their move. Sarah left you to protect you. But she couldn't protect herself from what's coming next. They're going to come after her, Mark. And they'll come after anyone who stands in their way. A cold shiver ran down Mark's spine. The man's words were like a dagger, cutting through his mind, leaving a trail of confusion and fear in their wake. If what he was saying was true, then Sarah was in even greater danger than Mark had ever imagined. She hadn't just left him for a younger man, she had left because she knew the storm was coming, and she needed to protect him. But the question was, had she made the right choice? Mark's voice was barely above a whisper. Where is she? I need to find her. I need to make sure she's okay. The man shook his head. You don't get it, do you? She's not safe. She's already too deep into this. And if you try to find her, they'll come after you too. You're both in danger. I'm trying to help you, Mark. I'm giving you this warning because you need to stay away. If you want to survive, you need to forget about Sarah. Mark's eyes widened. Forget about her? I can't do that. She's my wife. You don't understand, the man interrupted sharply. She's already made her choice. She's already in too deep, and there's no going back. If you go after her, you'll be putting both your lives at risk. Trust me, I've seen it happen before. People who get too involved with these people, they don't come back. Mark felt the weight of the man's words sink into his chest, crushing him. He wasn't sure if he was angry, scared, or just utterly confused. But he was certain of one thing, he couldn't just walk away. He had to know the truth. He had to find Sarah. I don't care what you say, Mark said, his voice firming with resolve. I'm not going to let her go. I don't care if she's made a choice or not. I need to know what's going on. I need to understand why she left. The man sighed, running a hand over his face as if he were exhausted by the whole conversation. Fine. But know this, there are consequences to going after this. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And they won't hesitate to hurt you. So be careful, Mark. Be very careful. Mark stood up from the booth, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He didn't know who this man was, or why he was trying to warn him, but one thing was clear: the man's warnings weren't enough to stop him. He had to find Sarah. He had to understand why she had left, and what she had gotten herself involved in. But as he walked out of the diner, the rain still pouring down, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The world he had known was crumbling beneath his feet, and he had no idea where it would lead him. As he reached his car, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart skipped a beat when he saw who it was. It was a message from an unknown number, just like the one earlier. "Don't trust him, Mark. He's not who he says he is." Mark froze. His eyes darted around the empty street, the rain coming down harder now. What was going on? Who was trying to help him, and who was trying to deceive him? There was only one thing Mark knew for sure: the deeper he dug, the more tangled this web became. And Sarah was at the center of it all. The night seemed to stretch on forever as Mark drove down the rain-slicked streets. The headlights of his car cut through the misty fog, illuminating the pavement for mere seconds before it faded back into the abyss. His mind was a tangled mess of confusion, fear, and desperation. Sarah had left him for reasons that now seemed far more complex than he could have ever imagined. The strange man at the diner had dropped one bombshell after another, and now Mark was left with more questions than answers. The message he had received earlier, warning him not to trust the man who had given him the information, was gnawing at him. Who had sent it? What did they know? And, more importantly, could he trust anyone in this web of lies and shadows? Every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into a dark abyss, and yet he couldn't stop. He had to know the truth. He had to find Sarah. He glanced at his phone again, the screen lighting up with another message. This time, the unknown number was more direct. "You're too close, Mark. Stay away from her. She's in more danger than you realize." His hands tightened around the steering wheel. The messages were getting more threatening. Whoever was behind them didn't want him to keep searching. But what did they know that he didn't? What was it about Sarah that made her such a target? He knew that he couldn't stop now. He had already crossed a line. And if he pulled back now, if he walked away from this, he would never get the answers he needed. Sarah had been the love of his life. And he couldn't just let her go without knowing why. He turned off the main road and onto a smaller street that led to an old part of town. It was a place he hadn't been to in years, a place where memories of simpler times clung to the cracked sidewalks and faded buildings. It was here, in this forgotten corner of the city, that he had once found solace with Sarah. But now, everything felt different. Darker. Unfamiliar. The old apartment building he had driven to wasn't far now. It had once been their first home, a small, cozy space that had been filled with laughter and love. But now, the building was abandoned, its windows boarded up, the door barely hanging on its hinges. No one lived there anymore. It was a relic of the past, a symbol of everything that had been torn away from him. As he pulled into the parking lot, his headlights cast a long shadow across the building. He parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the derelict structure. Something about this place felt wrong. It was as if the air itself was thick with something dark, something hidden. But he couldn't turn back now. This was where it all started. This was where Sarah had once lived, before everything changed. Mark stepped out of the car and made his way toward the building. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a wet, cold mist that clung to his skin. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He reached the door and hesitated. This wasn't the place he remembered. It felt like stepping into the heart of a nightmare. He pushed the door open, wincing as it creaked on its rusted hinges. The smell of dust and mildew hit him immediately. The air inside was stagnant, and the silence was deafening. Mark's footsteps echoed as he moved through the dark hallway, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. He stopped in front of their old apartment door. The number 2B was barely visible, the paint worn and faded. He reached for the doorknob and twisted it. To his surprise, the door opened with ease. The place had been abandoned for months, yet it seemed like no one had bothered to lock it. Mark stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The familiar layout of the apartment hit him like a wave of nostalgia. The old couch, the coffee table they used to sit around, the kitchen where they had cooked countless meals together, it was all still there. But now, everything felt cold, abandoned, as though the life that had once filled this space had been wiped away. He moved through the apartment, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a strange sense of urgency now, a feeling that he was racing against time, that something was about to happen. He walked into the bedroom and froze. The bed was empty, the sheets rumpled, as though someone had just left in a hurry. Mark's eyes scanned the room, landing on something that immediately sent a chill down his spine. On the nightstand, there was a piece of paper. It looked out of place, as if it had been deliberately left behind. He picked it up with trembling hands. The paper was old, its edges frayed. It was a letter, written in Sarah's handwriting. Mark. If you're reading this, it means you found your way here. And that means you're in more danger than I could have ever imagined. I never wanted you to be involved in this, but now it's too late. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm sorry. I thought I could protect you by leaving, but I was wrong. There are things going on that I can't explain. I wish I could tell you everything, but it's too dangerous. They are watching us. They have been for a long time. If you go looking for me, you'll put both our lives at risk. Please, Mark, stay away. Forget about me. You have to. I love you, always. Sarah. Mark's hands shook as he read the letter. His mind raced with questions. Who was they? What had Sarah gotten herself involved in? And why hadn't she told him? She had left him, yes, but it seemed there was more to it than just a simple love affair with a younger man. There was something far darker at play here. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. The words were like a haunting echo in his mind, and yet they didn't give him the answers he so desperately needed. If anything, they only deepened the mystery. He turned and began to leave the apartment, but as he did, he heard something, a soft scuffling noise coming from the hallway. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He froze, his eyes darting toward the sound. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Someone else was here. Someone who didn't want him to find what he was looking for. He stepped back into the shadows, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His heart raced as he tried to listen for any movement. The sound grew louder, closer. Whoever it was, they were coming toward him. Mark crouched low, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until finally, the figure appeared in the hallway. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was the man from the diner, the one who had warned him about Sarah and the danger she was in. But he wasn't alone. There were two others with him. Mark's eyes narrowed. They were both tall, muscular, and wearing dark clothes that blended into the shadows. They moved with purpose, their expressions hard and unreadable. "Is he here?" one of them asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah," the man from the diner replied, his tone tight. "He's in the apartment." Mark's stomach churned. They were looking for him. They knew he was here. Without thinking, Mark turned and bolted toward the exit. His feet pounded against the floor as he ran through the darkened hallway, his breath ragged in his chest. He reached the door, flung it open, and ran into the night, the rain pouring down once again. He didn't look back. He could hear the footsteps behind him, getting closer. He sprinted faster, his heart racing, adrenaline coursing through his veins. His only thought was to escape from the men who were chasing him, escape from the truth that was quickly becoming too dangerous to uncover. As he rounded the corner of the building, he glanced over his shoulder. The men were still following him. They hadn't given up. And now, Mark realized with a sinking feeling, neither could he. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't turn back. He had to find Sarah. He had to find out what was going on, no matter the cost. Mark's lungs burned as he sprinted down the rain-slicked alleyway, the sound of heavy footsteps pounding behind him. His heart was racing, his mind a chaotic blur of fear and adrenaline. The cold rain stung his face, but it was the sharp edge of terror that kept him moving forward. He couldn't look back. Not now. Not when he was this close. Don't stop. Keep running. The words echoed in his mind, a mantra to keep him going. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever, but if he could just find a way to shake them, just long enough to figure out what the hell was happening, maybe, just maybe, he could still make it out alive. Mark's breath came in shallow gasps as he rounded the corner, his eyes darting around the alleyway for any sign of a way out. But all he saw were the same dark, narrow streets stretching out into the night. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to escape. They were closing in on him, and every step he took brought him closer to being caught. Think, Mark. Think. He turned a sharp corner, his feet skidding on the wet pavement. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The man at the diner, the warning message on his phone, the letter Sarah had left behind, all of it was leading him here, into the heart of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. There were people, powerful people, who didn't want him to uncover the truth. People who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But why? What were they hiding? What was it about Sarah that made her so dangerous? Mark didn't have the answers yet, but he was going to find out. His eyes flicked to a small alley on his left. It was barely visible in the dim light, but it seemed like a possible escape route. Without thinking, Mark veered off and plunged into the narrow passageway, his footsteps echoing off the brick walls. The alley was dark and twisted, winding its way between buildings that seemed to loom over him like silent sentinels. He couldn't see what lay ahead, but he pushed forward anyway, the fear of being caught driving him to keep moving. I can't let them catch me. Not now. Not when I'm so close. He reached the end of the alley and stumbled out into a more open street, but as he did, his heart sank. A black SUV was parked at the far end, the engine running, its headlights cutting through the mist. Mark's blood ran cold. He knew it wasn't a coincidence. They're waiting for me. Mark froze, his hand gripping the nearest dumpster as he struggled to regain his breath. He had to act fast, but his options were limited. There were no side streets, no exits, and the men chasing him had only one purpose, to stop him from uncovering the truth. Before he could make a move, the back door of the SUV swung open, and 3 figures stepped out. The leader was a tall man in a dark suit, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. The other 2 men, also dressed in black, were tall, broad-shouldered, and silent. They moved like shadows, their eyes scanning the street for any sign of movement. Mark's pulse quickened. There was no way out. He was cornered. But just as the men began to approach, a voice broke through the tension. It was a woman's voice, soft but firm, calling out from the shadows. "Leave him alone," the voice said, sharp and authoritative. Mark's eyes widened. He turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness, stepping into the dim light of the street lamp. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, but there was something different about her. Something cold and distant. The men stopped in their tracks, eyeing her warily. The man in the suit took a step forward, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and controlled. "This is not your business. Step aside." Mark's heart raced as he stared at his wife. What was she doing here? Why was she with these people? Sarah didn't move. Instead, she raised her chin, her eyes locked on the man in the suit. I said leave him alone, she repeated, her voice stronger this time. I'm not going anywhere. Mark's mind was spinning. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't the Sarah he knew. The Sarah he loved. The woman who had once been full of warmth and light. The woman who had left him, had she left him to protect him from something worse? Or had she been caught in something she couldn't escape? Sarah, what's going on? Mark asked, his voice shaky, desperate. What is all of this? Who are these people? Sarah's eyes flickered toward him, but her expression remained hard, distant. You don't need to know. You never did. The words cut through him like a blade. It was as if the woman he had loved, the woman he had spent years with, was suddenly a stranger. But before Mark could respond, the man in the suit spoke again, his voice tinged with frustration. This is your last warning, Sarah. Step aside, or we'll handle this the hard way. Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small device, holding it in front of her. Mark's eyes widened in confusion. What was she holding? I'm not asking you again, Sarah said, her tone unwavering. The man in the suit's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Mark thought he saw a flicker of hesitation. But it was gone in an instant. With a sharp motion, he reached for his gun, and the other two men tensed, ready to move. But before anyone could act, Sarah pressed a button on the device, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. The lights around them flickered, and Mark's vision blurred for a split second. The men in black staggered, their bodies jerking as if they had been hit by an electric shock. Mark's breath caught in his throat. What had just happened? The man in the suit gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with rage. You don't know what you're doing, Sarah. You've just made a huge mistake. But Sarah didn't flinch. She simply nodded to Mark. Run, she said, her voice cold but firm. Without hesitation, Mark turned and ran. His feet pounded against the pavement as he raced down the street, not daring to look back. The sound of footsteps followed him, but they were quieter now, distant. Had Sarah done this to give him a chance to escape? Was she helping him? He didn't know, and he didn't have time to find out. He had to keep running, keep moving. He ran until his legs felt like they would give out, until the streets began to blur together in a haze of rain and fog. Finally, when he could run no more, he slowed, his body shaking with exhaustion. His breath was coming in ragged gasps as he leaned against a nearby wall, trying to steady himself. What had just happened? What was Sarah mixed up in? And why had she helped him escape? He knew one thing for certain, this was far from over. Whatever game Sarah was playing, Mark had no choice but to follow her into the darkness. The danger was only beginning. But what was the truth? Who could he trust? And in the end, would Sarah be the one to save him, or was she the one who had led him into the abyss? Mark could feel the blood pounding in his ears, each thumping heartbeat making it harder to focus. He had escaped them. The men in black. Sarah's warning. The mysterious device. For now, he was safe, but his mind raced, the swirling questions growing louder with each passing moment. What had Sarah just done? Why had she helped him escape? He thought he knew her, once. But now, everything had changed. She wasn't the woman he had loved, the one who had promised him forever. No, she was someone else entirely, tangled in a web he could barely comprehend. Mark had no choice now but to find her, to force the answers out of her. But where was she? And more importantly, was she even still the woman he thought she was? He stood still for a moment, drenched in rain, trying to catch his breath. He was somewhere on the outskirts of the city, far from the apartment. The streets were quiet, eerily so. It felt like the calm before a storm, but the question was, who would be the storm? Was it Sarah? Or the men she seemed to be running from? Or worse, was there something more to this whole situation, something he hadn't even begun to fathom? Mark's legs wobbled beneath him, his body sore from running. He needed to regroup. To think. Where would she go? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. Sarah had always been drawn to the edges of the city, the forgotten places where people couldn't find her. She liked the quiet, the isolation. And there was one place in the city that fit that description perfectly, a little-known and rarely visited district on the outskirts. A place where you could disappear for days and no one would think twice about it. It was the perfect place for someone like Sarah to hide. The drive felt longer than it should have. Mark's fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His thoughts spiraled out of control. He had no idea what he was walking into. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. As he approached the district, the city skyline grew distant, replaced by abandoned warehouses and run-down buildings. The air grew thicker, the streets darker. He turned into a narrow alley, his headlights briefly illuminating a sign that read, "Welcome to East End." The district wasn't much, empty storefronts, broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, but it was Sarah's refuge. Or at least, it used to be. She had spent hours walking these streets, searching for something she never really explained. He never asked. But now, he wished he had. Mark parked his car at the edge of the district and got out. The rain had stopped, but the air still hung heavy with moisture. As he made his way through the deserted streets, every step seemed to echo louder in the eerie silence. He paused in front of a particular building, a small, run-down storefront that had once been a cafe. Sarah had always loved the coffee here, back when things were simpler. Back when he hadn't been so afraid of what might happen next. The door was unlocked, and Mark hesitated before entering. He pushed the door open cautiously, stepping inside. The interior was dim, with broken furniture and peeling paint. A stale smell hung in the air, the remnants of past customers. Mark's eyes scanned the room, but there was no sign of Sarah. "Sarah," he called softly, his voice barely a whisper in the stillness. No response. He moved deeper into the cafe, his footsteps soft against the old wooden floors. The place had an unsettling feeling about it, as though it were frozen in time, holding on to memories that no one wanted to let go of. The farther Mark went, the more the darkness seemed to press in on him, until he could barely make out the edges of the room. But then, he noticed something. A faint glow from the back. He walked toward the light, his breath quickening. It led him down a narrow hallway and into a small back room. There, sitting in the corner, was a figure. It was Sarah. She was staring at the wall, her back to him. Her face was expressionless, her eyes distant, as if she were lost in thought. Mark's heart skipped a beat, and he took a hesitant step forward. "Sarah?" he asked again, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't respond at first. The silence stretched between them, suffocating in its weight. Then, slowly, Sarah turned to face him. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as though the life had been drained from her. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice hollow. "I just didn't think it would be this soon." Mark's throat tightened, his hands shaking as he approached her. "What's happening, Sarah? What did you get involved in? Who were those people?" Sarah's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe? Or regret? She opened her mouth to speak, but her words caught in her throat. It was as if she were struggling to find the right thing to say, or perhaps the right thing to not say. "Mark," she began, her voice soft. "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get involved in this. But you're too deep in now. And there's no turning back." Mark took another step toward her, desperate for answers. "Sarah, please. I need to understand. You left me. You left everything we had. For what? What was so important that you couldn't trust me with it? Her eyes flickered to the floor, and she clenched her fists. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, and Mark felt a sense of dread creeping in. She was hiding something, something big. It's not what you think, Sarah said, her voice cracking. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to. Those people, they were going to hurt you, Mark. They are going to hurt you if you don't stop looking for me. Mark was taken aback by the raw fear in her voice. What do you mean, they'll hurt me? What are you mixed up in, Sarah? She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously to the door, as if she feared someone would walk in at any moment. You don't understand. It's bigger than us. I got involved with the wrong people, people who deal with things you don't want to know about. Things that can destroy lives. And now, they're after you. They're watching us, Mark. Mark's stomach twisted. He had known there was something she wasn't telling him, but this was far beyond what he had imagined. Who are they, Sarah? What do they want from us? She looked up at him, her eyes full of sorrow. They want control. Power. And they've been using people like me to get it. I was a pawn, Mark. And I thought I could get out, but the deeper I dug, the harder it became. I left you to protect you from them. I thought if I disappeared, they'd leave you alone. Tears welled in Mark's eyes, his voice trembling as he spoke. I would have helped you. We could have fought this together. I know, Sarah whispered. I know. But I was too scared. I thought I was protecting you by running away. But now, I see I was wrong. I've put you in more danger than you could ever imagine. Mark's mind was reeling, his heart breaking. The woman he had loved, she had been running from a nightmare, and he hadn't known. He didn't know if he could forgive her for leaving, but right now, he didn't have the luxury of thinking about that. They had bigger problems. They're coming, Mark, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with terror. They'll stop at nothing. If we don't leave right now, it'll be too late. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the front of the cafe. Mark's blood ran cold. Someone was here. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. Sarah, Mark breathed, panic rising in his chest. We need to get out. Now. But it was too late. The door burst open, and a figure stepped into the room. It was the man in the suit, the one from earlier. The one who had warned Sarah. And behind him, two other men stepped in, their eyes cold and unwavering. You thought you could hide, Sarah, the man in the suit said, his voice dark and filled with menace. You're not going anywhere. Mark's heart raced as he looked at Sarah. This was it. They had nowhere to run. But just as the man stepped forward, Sarah pressed something into Mark's hand. Run, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as he looked at the device in his hand. What was it? What was she giving him? He didn't have time to ask. Without thinking, he bolted toward the back of the cafe, not looking back. He ran into the alleyway, the sound of footsteps echoing behind him. The storm was closing in. And this time, there would be no turning back.